listeners. Here I am with another exciting and spine-chilling murder mystery by Agatha Christie. The name of my story is Tape Measure Murder. Mrs. Pollitt took hold of the knocker and rapped politely on the cottage door. After a discreet interval, she knocked again. The parcel under her left arm shifted a little as she did so, and she readjusted it. Inside the parcel was Mrs. Spenlow's new green winter dress, ready for fitting. From Miss Pollitt's left hand dangled a bag of black silk containing a tape measure, a pincushion, and a large practical pair of scissors. Miss Pollitt was tall and gaunt, with a sharp nose, pursed lips, and meager iron grey hair. She hesitated before using the knocker for the third time. Glancing down the street, she saw a figure rapidly approaching. Miss Hartnell, jolly, weather-bitten 55, shouted out in her usual loud bass voice, "Good afternoon, Miss Pollitt." The dressmaker answered, "Good afternoon, Miss Hartnell." Her voice was excessively thin and genteel in its accents. She had started life as a lady's maid. "Excuse me," she went on, "but do you happen to know if by any chance Mrs. Spenlow isn't at home?" "Not the least idea," said Miss Hartnell. "It's rather awkward, you see. I was to fit on Mrs. Spenlow's new dress this afternoon. 3:30, she said." Miss Hartnell consulted her wristwatch. "It's a little past the half hour now." "Yes, I have knocked 3 times, but there doesn't seem to be any answer. So I was wondering if perhaps Mrs. Spenlow might have gone out and forgotten. She doesn't forget appointments as a rule, and she wants the dress to wear the day after tomorrow." Miss Hartnell entered the gate and walked up the path to join Miss Pollitt outside the door of Laburnum Cottage. "Why doesn't Gladys answer the door?" she demanded. "Oh no, of course. It's Thursday, Gladys' day out. I expect Mrs. Spenlow has fallen asleep. I don't expect you have made enough noise with this thing." Seizing the knocker, she executed a deafening rat-a-tat-tat and in addition thumped upon the panels of the door. She also called out in a stentorian voice, "What ho! Within there!" There was no response. Miss Pollitt murmured, "Oh, I think Mrs. Spenlow must have forgotten and gone out. I'll call round some other time." She began edging away down the path. "Nonsense," said Miss Hartnell firmly. "She can't have gone out. I would have met her. I'll just take a look through the windows and see if I can find any signs of life." She laughed in her usual hearty manner to indicate that it was a joke, and applied a perfunctory glance to the nearest window pane. Perfunctory because she knew quite well that the front room was seldom used, Mr. and Mrs. Spenlow preferring the small back sitting room. Perfunctory as it was, though, it succeeded in its object. Miss Hartnell, it is true, saw no signs of life. On the contrary, she saw, through the window, Mrs. Spenlow lying on the hearthrug, dead. "Of course," said Miss Hartnell, telling the story afterwards, "I managed to keep my head. That Pollitt creature wouldn't have had the least idea of what to do. 'Got to keep our heads,' I said to her. 'You stay here and I'll go to the Constable Pock.' She said something about not wanting to be left, but I paid no attention at all. One has to be firm with that sort of person. I have always found they enjoy making a fuss. So I was just going off when, at that very moment, Mr. Spenlow came round the corner of the house." Here Miss Hartnell made a significant pause. It enabled her audience to ask breathlessly, Tell me, how did he look? Miss Hartnell would then go on. Frankly, I suspected something at once. He was far too calm. He didn't seem surprised in the least. And you may say what you like, it isn't natural for a man to hear that his wife is dead and display no emotions whatever. Everybody agreed to this statement. The police agreed with it too. So suspicious did they consider Mr. Spenlow's detachment that they lost no time in ascertaining how the gentleman was situated as a result of his wife's death. When they discovered that Mrs. Spenlow had been moneyed partner and that her money went to her husband under a will made soon after their marriage, they were more suspicious than ever. Miss Marple, that sweet-faced and, some said, vinegar-tongued, elderly spinster who lived in the house next to the rectory, was interviewed very clearly. Within half an hour of the discovery of the crime, she was approached by Police Constable Pock, importantly thumbing a notebook. If you don't mind, ma'am, I have a few questions to ask you. Miss Marple said, in connection with the murder of Mrs. Spenlow. Pock was startled. May I ask, madam, how you got to know of it? The fish, said Miss Marple. The reply was perfectly intelligible to Constable Pock. He assumed correctly that the fishmonger's boy had brought it, together with Miss Marple's evening meal. Miss Marple continued gently, lying on the floor in the sitting room, strangled, possibly by a very narrow belt, but whatever it was taken away. Pock's face was wrathful. How that young Fred gets to know everything! Miss Marple cut him short adroitly. She said, "There is a pin in your tunic." Constable Pock looked down, startled. He said, "They do say, see a pin and pick it up all day, you will have the good luck." I hope that will come true. Now what is it you want me to tell you? Constable Pock cleared his throat, looked important, and consulted his notebook. Statement was made to me by Mr. Arthur Spenlow, husband of the deceased. Mr. Spenlow says that at 2:30, as far as he can say, he was rung up by Miss Marple and asked if he would come over at 3:15 as she was anxious to consult him about something. Now, ma'am, is that true? Certainly not, said Miss Marple. You did not ring Mr. Spenlow at 2:30? Neither at 2:30 nor any other time. Ah, said Constable Pock, and sucked his moustache with a good deal of satisfaction. What else did Mr. Spenlow say? Mr. Spenlow's statement was that he came over here as requested, leaving his own house at 3:10, that on arrival here he was informed by the maidservant that Miss Marple was not at home. That part of it is true. He did come here, but I was at a meeting at the Women's Institute. Ah, said Constable Pock again. Miss Marple exclaimed, Do tell me, Constable, do you suspect Mr. Spenlow? It's not for me to say at this stage, but it looks to me as though somebody, naming no names, has been trying to be artful. Miss Marple said thoughtfully, Mr. Spenlow? She liked Mr. Spenlow. He was a small, spare man, stiff and conventional in speech, the acme of respectability. It seemed odd that he should have come to live in the country. He had so clearly lived in towns all his life. To Miss Marple, he confided the reason. He said, I have always intended, ever since I was a small boy, to live in the country someday and have a garden of my own. I have always been very much attached to flowers. My wife, you know, kept a flower shop. That's where I saw her first. A dry statement, but it opened up a vista of romance. A younger, prettier Mrs. Spenlow, seen against a background of flowers. Mr. Spenlow, however, really knew nothing about flowers. He had no idea of seeds, of cuttings, of bedding out, of annuals or perennials. He had only a vision of a small cottage garden thickly planted with sweet-smelling, brightly colored blossoms. He had asked almost pathetically for instructions and had noted down Miss Marple's replies to questions in a little book. He was a man of quiet method. It was, perhaps, because of this trait that the police were interested in him when his wife was found murdered. With patience and perseverance, they learned a good deal about the late Mrs. Spenlow, and soon all St. Mary Mead knew it too. The late Mrs. Spenlow had begun life as a between maid in a large house. She had left that position to marry the second gardener, and with him had started a flower shop in London. The shop had prospered. Not so the gardener, who before long had sickened and died. His widow carried on the shop and enlarged it in an ambitious way. She had continued to prosper. Then she had sold the business at a handsome price and embarked upon matrimony for the second time. With Mr. Spenlow, a middle-aged jeweler who had inherited a small and struggling business. Not long afterwards, they had sold the business and came down to St. Mary Mead. Mrs. Spenlow was a well-to-do woman. The profits from her florist establishment she had invested. Under spirit guidance, as she explained to all and sundry, the spirits had advised her with unexpected acumen. All her investments had prospered, some in quite a sensational fashion. Instead, however, of this increasing her belief in spiritualism, Mrs. Spenlow basely deserted mediums and sittings. She was a good deal at the vicarage and attended church services with assiduity. She patronized the village shops, took an interest in the local happenings, and played village bridge. A humdrum everyday life, and suddenly murder. Colonel Melchett, the chief constable, had summoned Inspector Slack. Slack was a positive type of man. When he had made up his mind, he was sure. He was quite sure now. "Husband did it, sir," he said. "You think so?" "Quite sure of it. You've only got to look at him. Guilty as hell. Never showed a sign of grief or emotion. He came back to the house knowing she was dead. Wouldn't he at least have tried to act the part of the distracted husband?" "Not him, sir. Too pleased with himself. Some gentlemen can't act. Too stiff." "Any other woman in his life?" Colonel Melchett asked. "Haven't been able to find any trace of one. Of course, he is the artful kind. He would cover his tracks. As I see it, he was just fed up with his wife. She had got the money, and I should say was a trying woman to live with, always taking up with some ism or other. He cold-bloodedly decided to do away with her and live comfortably on his own. Always taking up with some ism or other. He cold-bloodedly decided to do away with her and live comfortably on his own. Yes, that could be the case, I suppose. Depend upon it, sir. That was it. Made his plans careful, pretended to get a phone call. Melchett interrupted him. "No call been traced?" "No, sir. That means either that he had lied or that the call was put through from a public telephone booth. The only two public phones in the village are at the station and the post office." "Post office it certainly wasn't. Mrs. Blade sees everyone who comes in. Station it might be. Train arrives at 2:27 and there is a bit of bustle then. But the main thing is, he says it was Miss Marple who called him up, and that certainly isn't true. The call didn't come from her house, and she herself was away at the institute. And now, listeners, you have listened to the first part of the story. And very soon I'll be back with the next and the concluding part of the story. Don't miss.